1799, the year that should have been but never was. A year when the ancestors of the Quander family were supposed to be freed from the plantation of America's father himself, George Washington. Now, they are a reminder of American slavery, and they're making sure no one forgets their long legacy. The Quander family is one of the oldest and most traceable black families in United States history. And unlike many other descendants of American slavery, the Quanders can trace their lineage back to West Africa.
Now, the slave trade did not come this way right away, and you didn't have direct communication in those early days, but usually they went down into the West Indies and brought them up here. So we have the story of two brothers who were brought here from the islands, and the story goes they were separated. And they were not able to reestablish their contact, but their descendants were. So we ended up with one group on the Maryland side and eventually some on the Virginia side, knowing that we were all one family. So we are all descendant of the Quander line, but the ones at Mount Vernon, of course, have a higher visibility because of George Washington, but it's all one family.
Former WUSA 9 reporter Michael Quander previously covered the long history of his family, but we continue to unpack more information about the family's large legacy in the DMV community. The Quanders ended up in Virginia after being traded across a body of water and would end up building the foundation of the United States literally and figuratively. Jamon Quander, the owner of 1799 Prime Steak and Seafood in Alexandria, Virginia, says the correlation between the name of his restaurant and the year 1799 is how it represented hope for his family.
The name 1799, the way that came about was George Washington in his will decreed that his slaves would be freed upon his passing. However, not until Martha Washington had passed, his wife. But December 14th of 1799 was when George Washington passed away. And so for me, I felt like with regards to my family, it represented the hope of freedom.
Before opening his restaurant, Jamon worked at Mount Vernon, the estate of President George Washington. Jamon comes from a long line of Quanders that have chosen to work at Mount Vernon since their enslaved ancestors were freed from the estate. He was the director of food and beverage and said it was a full circle moment as he became one of the leaders on the property.
It was pretty surreal, to be quite honest with you. And there were days that I would leave my office and just walk around the estate by myself. And it was absolutely beautiful. But then there were other days, I got a little teary-eyed, because you're looking at the estate and I could only imagine what my ancestors may have endured during that time, especially like if it was in July or August and it was just ridiculously hot outside.
Once people knew who he was, his co-workers couldn't stop raving about his aunt, Gladys Quander, the first black tour guide at Mount Vernon.
I was constantly reminded, my aunt Gladys, like, oh my God, I knew Gladys. They would tell me all about Gladys.
She was hired at the estate in 1975 after having a career in the government. Gladys was active in her community as a member of the NAACP, the Black Women United of Fairfax County, and a founding member of Alexandria Society for the Preservation of Black Heritage. The Quanders have documented their family members that have serviced Mount Vernon dating all the way back to the 18th century. Tom Quander, for example, was employed with Mount Vernon from 1893 until 1936. Mount Vernon archives explain that Tom was a laborer and later a gardener in the propagating house. He would later assist Thomas Edison at the estate with planting an elm tree on September 19, 1916. Dating back even further, a girl named Nancy was one of the many enslaved people on the Mount Vernon estate. She was 11 the year Washington died, and Mount Vernon's records confirm that later in life she married Charles Quander, who was a free black man from Maryland. Nancy and her family had to register with local authorities to show proof of their freedom.
The legacy of slavery is America's original sin. There's no two ways about it. People have got to understand that the enslaved, even when they were so-called freed. We weren't freed and given anything. We were just turned loose, you're on your own.
While on the Mount Vernon estate, enslaved people like Nancy Quander lived in harsh conditions. Jesse McLeod, a Mount Vernon expert, explained that it is well known that Washington granted enslaved people on his estate freedom in his will, but what is lesser known is that not all would see that freedom.
There were 317 people enslaved here the year Washington died. He was able to free 123 of them, but 153 of them were owned by the Custis estate, which was the estate of Martha's first husband. And she had lifetime use of them, but she and George did not have the authority to free them. So they were actually still enslaved even after Martha died, and they were inherited by her grandchildren.
41 other enslaved people that Washington rented from other slave owners were not freed. Many of those that were not freed remained enslaved until their death or the Civil War.
The history of this country, slavery and all, with all of its brutality, is not a nice story, but it's American history. Black history is American history. So if we're going to really tell the story, we have to tell the whole story.
From 1799 to 2023, with 224 years in between, the Quanders still stand in the DMV miles from Mount Vernon. Although the Quander family story started long before the birth of America, they are still writing new chapters. The family that once tirelessly worked without the luxury of freedom chooses to work and share the stories of their enslaved ancestors who once maintained the estate to ensure that the contributions of their family and many others are not forgotten.